Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Ed Roberts, and this is my better half, Dr. Mashika Roberts. And as the co-chairs of the Key Club, we would like to thank you all for being here tonight. Additionally, I'd like to thank our event sponsors, Crab Brown and James, Donna and Larry James, Jenny and Louis R. Smoot Sr., Joy and Bruce Soul, Smoot Construction Company, and all of our Champion of Children partners and patrons who made this event possible. Let's give them a round of applause. We'd also like to recognize and thank our event partner who is providing the film for us for discussion tonight, the Ohio State University Todd A. Bell National Resource Center. Here on their behalf is Dr. Valerie Lee, Dr. James Moore, Ty Cornute, and their entire staff. Let's give them a round of applause as well. Tonight, we will watch American Promise, which will address an issue that is very topical, the American educational system. Currently, our state legislators are debating the roles of charter schools. Our presidential candidates are flip-flopping on Common Core, and our president believes that collegiate education should be affordable. So I ask you, what is an adequate education? What is an appropriate education? What is the right education? While we can debate the answers to these questions, we cannot deny that education, in some fashion, is a tool that enables us to develop a productive citizenry.
So after tonight's discussion, please don't run off. We will conclude tonight's event with more discussion and coffee and dessert upstairs in the Lincoln Ballroom. At that time, you will also have the opportunity to purchase the book, Promises Kept, which is from the movie that we're going to be seeing today, as well as get it signed by our special guest who will be joining us at the reception. Finally, before we bring tonight's moderator up, let me encourage you all to think about joining Key Club and supporting Champion of Children. In order to continue the great work that is being done in this community, we need all of your support to make it happen. For more information about how to become a member of Key Club or to get more information about Champion of Children, please take a look at the resources available in the concession area and the main lobby. So, without further ado, let's introduce tonight's moderator, Mr. Scott Reeves. Scott Reeves is entering his 5th year as the Executive Director of Secondary Academic Affairs for Westerville City Schools. Prior to joining Westerville, Mr. Reeves served as the principal of Pickerington High School Central, assistant principal of Reynoldsburg High School, and nearly a decade as a teacher and a coach in the Columbus City Schools. Mr. Reeves is also currently president of the Board of Directors of the Ohio High School Athletic Association Central District Athletic Board. He serves as the Board of Directors of the Ohio State University Men's Varsity O Alumni Association, and he's also on the Board of Directors of the Trey Burke Foundation. He is not only an educator, but he is also a father of 3 wonderful children. So please help us give him a warm welcome as we get this evening started. Mr. Scott Reeves.
Thank you, Ed and Mashika. Good evening, everyone. Oh, come on. This auditorium is full in this beautiful historic place for this great event. I know you have more energy than that. Good evening, everyone. All right. My name is Scott Reeves, and professionally, as they said, I serve as the Executive Director of Secondary Schools for Westerville City Schools, and I am honored to share this evening with you. I take great value in my role as an educator, but I believe my most important role, one that I share with my wife Valerie, is that of being a parent. And like our filmmakers, Joe and Michelle, Valerie and I are parents to a teenage son. And like many of you that have sons, you know how nurturing boys to become young men is very, very challenging. We're juggling schedules and homework and practices and games and injuries and all the lessons that come as they move through their development into manhood. But for parents of African American sons, the challenge can be even more daunting. We also have to teach lessons about dealing with racism. We have to teach on how to deal with authority, on how to persevere when it seems that the deck is sometimes stacked against you. And as we've seen so many times this past year, we have to teach our sons about safety and how to be safe. So the insightful documentary that we will see in a few moments, American Promise, invites us into the lives of two young African-American boys, Idris and Shayan, and it follows their journey from kindergarten through high school graduation. But you'll see very quickly, this film is more than about academics. It explores the roles of parenting. It explores academic expectations and achievement. It asks us to consider what American Promise really means for those young men, and what does it mean for you and I. Before we begin, we're going to see roughly a 40-minute segment of the film. But for those of you who are social media butterflies, you can tweet your thoughts and questions using the hashtag KeyCOC. That's hashtag KEYCOC, and I know you can spell. There'll also be many pictures going on tonight, and I'm sure we're going to see pictures all over United Way's website and all over Facebook, and I'm sure 10 years from now we'll see these pictures again on Throwback Thursday. So now, I invite you to sit back and enjoy this segment of American Promise. So tell me, what'd you think? Very powerful, huh? When I saw this film for the first time a couple of weeks ago, I did so in preparation for my role tonight. But I don't know about you and the different roles that you play, but I very quickly began to look at it through the lens of an educator. And then I found very quickly I began to look at it through the lens of a parent and thinking, what would I say in that situation? What would I do? What would my wife say in that situation? We were laughing backstage because my wife would have very similar responses as you saw Michelle have there. And I even can recall some of the same feelings that Idris and Shayan had myself as a boy. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest, and we'll chat for about 30 minutes. Some things we'll be able to get to in that time frame, some things we won't. But the key thing is this is the start of a greater and more powerful and needed conversation. Then, as time permits, we'll open it up for a little Q&A from the audience, because this is truly a community conversation, and we want to hear what you guys have on your mind and the questions that you have for our guest. So, without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to two really amazing people. In addition to seeking the best possible education for their son, they courageously documented their life and opened it up to share with the world. Not only do they have a great value for education, as they both have multiple degrees, but they share a passion for human rights and social change. Please assist me in giving a big OHIO welcome to filmmakers and parents of Idris, Michelle Stevenson and Joe Brewster. First off, welcome. Welcome to Columbus. I understand this is both of your first visit here.
Yes.
And we were scared earlier in the week because we heard you had a few snowflakes in New York and we weren't sure that you were going to get here. But they got here and we're glad to have you. So, yes, sir.
I just want to say I was scared because I'm from California. Mm-hmm. And I was rooting for Ohio. Oregon.
Oh! That's the wrong O, the wrong O.
But the best team won.
Yes, they did. Well, I tell you this, and I know you guys aren't here, but for a short time, before you leave, you have to get Idris and Miles a national championship T-shirt.
Oh, that's true.
That's
Yeah.
right. So for those that are really getting acquainted with American Promise and the things that you're trying to do, and they saw a large glimpse of Idris and Shayon in middle school, a little bit in high school, what are they doing now? Tell us what their life is like now.
Well, they're growing up. Idris is 20. He's at Occidental College in California. He and his girlfriend moved out there. It's the same girlfriend. That's a good sign. He's a computer science and cognitive science major, and he's looking to do work with computer games and startups. Shayon is back in New York. He's at York College in Queens, and he's a junior, and he's studying graphic design. They are the wonderful young men that we expected. But at 20, you guys know they're still young.
Yes. Yes.
And they've been actually quite involved with the work that we've been doing with the film. Both Idris and Shayon have conducted workshops with other youth and have participated in Q&As and have kind of traveled with the film. So I think they're pretty comfortable and proud of the piece.
Okay. So what made you take the step of documenting this experience, and what outcomes were you hoping for, and how did that evolve as they grew and you grew as a family?
Wow. Well, I think we had been filmmakers before this, adventure at Dalton. And when we first started, we wanted to experiment with the form, with the documentary form. We were big admirers of the longitudinal type of approaches to film, to documentary film. Specifically, I don't know if people have heard of this 7 Up series. It's a series out of the UK, this filmmaker who followed children from 7 years old, and now he's following them, they're 56. And he visits with them every 7 years. But it was really looking at the class system in the UK and looking at, do people stay rigidly in their class, or is there any upward mobility? And does education make a difference? So we wanted to kind of model that, but kind of be more intimate in the process. But when we first started, we actually not only had Idris and Shayon, but we had 3 girls too. So it was really looking at this experiment in diversity. It was an African-American girl, a Latina girl, and also a white girl who from the Upper East Side, upper class, wealthy. And as we started to move along the years, it's a big commitment. We wanted them to stay on for 13 years. All of the girls dropped out of the project. They stayed at Dalton, but they dropped out of the documentary project. And by the time the boys hit middle school, is when all of the girls had left, and we found ourselves as a family kind of, in the middle of the struggle. Yes?
I'm just noticing they got a clock on us.
I know. They do. Shot clock.
But, so I want to say something different.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I've heard that answer, but the reality is we are both from modest means. We have amazing educations. We've been moved by what we've seen and experienced in our lives in terms of how our people are treated and the obstacles that we face. And we moved into film so we can document that. And so that's why I moved to New York. That's why I went from psychiatry to film. And that's not why you moved to New York. You wanted to be a lawyer. But after law, you fell in love with this art form.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing opportunity to exist today when so many people are looking at the implications behind how we're seen in the media and how we're treated and how we incorporate those images. You will rarely see a black middle-class family dealing with everyday life on television. And we need more of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what motivates us to really dig into those stories and create complicated representations where we see our full humanity.
Yeah.
That's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Well, we thank you. So, talking about how we are perceived and treated early in the film, we saw that Idris got into a little trouble. And one of the things that we know, and the data plays it out nationally, that when you look at the discipline disparities of African Americans, specifically African American males, it's grossly disproportionate to their representation. A lot of that may stem from perception of their behavior, of their intent. So kind of talk through how you grew through that and advocated for your son, and how the relationship between you and teachers built and grew from that, and larger implications nationally.
Okay. That'll take okay, we got 20 minutes.
That's all right.
Well, it's not just the school system. It's in African American homes. And so we try not to talk about the moment and talk about the big picture, the big structural picture, where we as African Americans are part of a social hierarchy that's stemming from slavery and the need to continue that to a new type of slavery, a new type of Jim Crow. But what has happened is that African American boys and girls are punished, as you know, 3 to 5 times more than white boys for committing the same infraction. We were not particularly aware of that. We began to experience it. But what we began to experience is the fact that our son experienced it. And so unless you have that talk with him early, it's kind of frazzles his mind to have to experience something like that. I mean, what does it say when you see Johnny take the candy and walk away, and you take the candy and you get 3 days suspension? Over and over and over again. And so when you have that talk, at least while he's in suspension, he's plotting for the next time. Yeah. Or he's not psychologically impaired by that as impaired. So what we began to do is to develop a plan specifically with our next son to address those issues. With the teachers, with the principal. We go in the first day of school, the second day of school, and we talk about what we expect for our son and what we expect of them.
I think we started to develop this kind of 3-pronged approach. Okay. I mean, one is doing this talk to our son, of course, so that he starts to understand that there are these structural forces around him that are, beyond what he can control, but that he can at least have a certain sense of self from how we discuss our backgrounds, from how we discuss where he comes from, how we kind of supplement sometimes a curriculum where it's necessary, so he can have a sense of validation when he goes out there. But the other big thing is really our relationship with the institution that he goes to. And that's from the intimate personal interactions with the teacher, because advocacy is, in some cases where we're talking about perception, it's really about us setting the stage with the teacher to let them know, this is who my son is, this is who we are. So we need you to treat him a certain way and understand that we're there and we have his back if something happens. And it's really crucial because what we have, 80% of teaching faculty are white female middle class who in some cases have never had interactions on an intimate level with African American community, with African American males. So they're using their source of reference to judge our boys. And so it is our responsibility, our duty to be there to intervene and to take the step ahead so that even if they do have those unconscious perceptions, which we all kind of internalize, they understand that there are people there watching those perceptions and that at least they can be more aware in their interactions. And it also goes with the administration of the institutions, our interactions with them as well.
So it's a very interesting phenomenon. Like we're talking about what they do to us, but in reality is we've internalized something. This we punish our children as more than others, and so you know there are four.
What do you mean by that? Expound a little bit.
There are about 4 types of parenting styles. You probably have a few sociologists and teachers.
Sure.
You know, there's punitive, there's permissive, and the children who are punished more frequently tend to drop out earlier and tend to make lower money. They have a lower life expectancy. Kids who are not punished, those are the families that we laugh at the park that get control of that kid. Well, that's preferable to punishing them. That's preferable to committing the same kind of atrocity that we commit against our own kids. So we are into punishment, we're into control, but you gotta start with a kiss and you gotta start with a hug. And I think one of the things that we learned with our second child, we hug him before we tell him to take out the garbage.
I'm gonna try that.
Try that one.
Well, you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned because that segued to my next question. Absolutely, we know that our student population is becoming ever more diverse, and in some instances even poorer. But our teaching staffs do not reflect that, and I know I am in a district that's actively trying to diversify our teaching staff as well to provide those examples, but there are not a lot out there to be had, and those that do are being heavily recruited. It was very actually insightful that the assistant curriculum director of Dalton was able to articulate that and internalize that African American boys don't do well here. There's schools all over the nation and in this town that will say that. So building that advocacy, I mean, talk about the experience and really expand on the parent meeting that you had where you said we need to come together to talk about this.
Well, I think there are 2 things here. I think the question is wrong because and as a professional, whether you're a professional educator, you know, in order for you to grow in your profession and something's not working, you have to reflect on your own practice. You know, so when it becomes this national pattern, there's something wrong with the educational system. So I think that there are things that and there's certain things that we as parents have to do.
Sure.
We have to call them on that in terms of their own pedagogy and approach with regards to our specific individual child. And sometimes that's where it starts, and hopefully we create a ripple effect. But there is some work that has to be done where the question has to be reversed as to what is it about white identity and whiteness and white privilege that makes it you can't teach everyone. You know? So, and I think that there are pockets of schools around the country that are reconsidering this question. And I think it is vital to the well-being of the entire nation that those questions start to be asked and that we have better educators that are more culturally responsive, but that also question their own space. You know, when we think about it, some of the most difficult struggles we have are within white liberal institutions. New York City has the worst, statistics for our young black men, yet it's a blue state. You know, there's certain places in the South that are doing better with our boys. So there are questions, yes?
5 states.
Okay.
In the South.
So I think part of it, and I think part of it is what, we're even doing now. We have some parent gatherings that we're having currently with the school that our younger son is at.
Okay.
And as we start understanding that, hey, there's a pattern here. This teacher is treating all of our boys in the wrong way. It's not just me, it's this other family, and too. We create the power that there is within group dynamic, within as a group, that we can then approach the institution and say, listen, this teacher, that teacher, this administrator, you got it wrong here because it's too much of a pattern within that specific classroom. So hopefully we can then take the teachers to task. So we really advocate for families to talk to each other.
So one of the questions they ask is, what is the particular situation with black middle-class families? And we don't get that question often. Yeah. We ask us how to help the single mother who's living on public subsidy. Yeah. Well, you know, black middle-class families are at almost a greater risk when you look at the gap, because we have bought into something we call exceptionalism. So we are comparing ourselves with the bottom 10th. And when we look at our life expectancy, the ability of our children to remain middle class, the ability of our children to be employed over a white young man who may have dropped out or maybe have a criminal record, those statistics are appalling. So we've convinced ourselves that we're doing okay because my dad is a lawyer, my mother is a teacher. But in reality, if you look at the numbers, white teachers versus black teachers' children, white doctors versus black doctors' children, those numbers are actually getting worse. And so we can't afford to pat ourselves on the back and say we've arrived. The interesting thing for us is black families, adults were not speaking to us about what we were experiencing. We realized later they were experiencing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I went to Harvard and I spoke to Alvin Poussaint, the black psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And he says, you know, every black professor at Harvard is having the same problem with their kid. And what he encouraged us to do is to increase the communication. If you, as a group, get 4 or 5 other families at your school or your job to get together and talk about what you're experiencing, you'd be surprised at the impact that we'll have on that institution. Because we cannot afford to just take care of our own sons. Mm-hmm. Because implicit bias is community-wide. Mm-hmm. So if I can create an implicit bias-free space in my home, mm-hmm. what happens when he goes out to the store to buy an ice cream and he's followed in the store? Yeah. So I talk to the store owner and he understands that my kid likes ice cream and he's got $1 in his pocket. So what happens if he leaves that store and goes to Macy's? Or leaves that store and goes into a hospital? So we have to gradually create larger and larger communities where we are aware mm-hmm. of the systemic issues, and you will be shocked at the difference that makes in some communities. They're about that in Omaha, Nebraska, where they brought in the police, mm-hmm. the doctors, they brought in the unions, and they have weekly meetings mm-hmm. so that the people in the community get to know each other. They know the aspirations of these kids, and it makes a difference. But I am rambling, and I'm looking at that time.
That's all right. Well, but you know, I'm interested in your assertion that even in the middle class, those gaps are widening because there's wide perception and people will pull out data that will suggest that the achievement gaps that exist are more economic than racial. Mm-hmm. And that because of the experiences that families, middle class families, middle to upper class families, white, black, blue, brown, provide for their students, they read to them, they take them to the museum, they take them on vacations, that they have an advantage. So I'm interested in your
You absolutely have an advantage. You know, when my son entered kindergarten, he was 97 percentile. Yeah. But he's not competing with the kids at the Fort Greene Projects. He's competing with Bernard Madoff's son and Joe Scarborough's son. And they're reading more. Yeah. And when their kids go into and we have a lot of footage. We had some footage of our son in FAO Schwartz running around, playing with the toys. We looked at the footage, and the editor was laughing, oh, it's cute. We're looking at footage and saying, you cannot do that in that store. You're going to get arrested. And you know what he said to us? Yeah, they came and stopped us, and they asked me if I had stole something. And so,
Yeah, this argument about socioeconomics over that is really, it's a red herring. And it's part of feeding into the myth that white privilege wants us to feed into. Because you cannot, the two intersect, and it is important for us to see how the two intersect. And it's all about avoiding the conversation that we need to have. And it's a conversation about race and how it matters. And I think in some ways our film, you know, attempts in the storytelling to really do away with falling back on socioeconomics. Because the portrayals we often see are not the portrayals you see in this film, and you see race right in front of you, and and how it's interacting even within the dynamics of Idris and Shayon at school, and it's all about avoiding that difficult, uncomfortable conversation, because for some people the status quo is easier. But we need to lean into those difficult conversations to move forward.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I want to kind of switch to the section of the film where Idris was talking about code switching. And I actually read an article prior to tonight where Idris was interviewed, and he said that the code switching piece, the film doesn't really depict. He said that was everything in our life, and we all did it. And I'd contend there's really two schools of thought with the code switching. One school of thought could be yourself. Be who you are. Regardless of the environment that you're in, people should accept you. You shouldn't switch who you are depending on the company you're in. Second school of thought would be code switching is almost a survival technique that you better be able to adapt from one environment to the other. And so how did that play out with him, and your thoughts on that?
I'm trying to avoid the silence. No, because it's a struggle. You know what? I want to win the race. And so sometimes I compromise, and I switch the code. But you know, I just saw an NPR radio program on the way over here where there was a professor in Georgia. He talked about code switching in his writing when he wrote for the radio. And he talked about the advantages of using Ebonics versus the standard English. And he talked about how he felt by being able to use his Ebonics and being understood. I say, in the best of all worlds, I will be able to be who I am. But you know, if I'm a financial planner and I'm working with someone who needs to hear standard English to get that account, I'm probably going to give them standard English.
Oh, go ahead.
The reality is I would like my son to be able to be who he is, and we haven't arrived yet.
And we haven't arrived, and I think part of the question with code switching, if we go, big, more meta also, is that there are power structures that force us to perceive certain codes as being less worthy than others. And that's where our sense of self then gets kind of tied into that. So it's not so much about code switching, it's like learning one language versus another and being able to speak that language fluently or not in another. It's what is it, the value that society is putting on speaking that language versus this language. And it's that power structure that envelops, that dynamic that really, is painful. So we have to, as Joe says, work on the fact that, it would be great if you could be who you are wherever you are, but at the same time, unpack, deconstruct the fact that you have to, in some ways, to get around, work these different codes, but that there really is value in all of them.
Yeah.
Because there's humanity in all of them.
So you talk about codes, and it gets more complicated than that because you're talking about language code, but there's a dress code, right? And there's a way you cut your hair code. And there was a time when my father would walk down the street in Longview, Texas, and he could not look. The code was that he could not look someone else in the eye. Where my kids walk and they're looking at everybody in the eye.
That's right.
But the reality is, the game is changing, but there's still rules. And if you violate those rules, people will know. And you will there's a consequence to pay. And if I feeling I'm willing to pay that consequence, I will pay that consequence.
And I think the way we benefit our children is helping them understand the code so they know how to manipulate it in a way that that distances themselves from not feeling worthy. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself right, but keeping that sense of core self of who you are as a person, but understanding that there are strategies that you have to use to navigate this system.
I'm sorry for going off topic.
That's all right.
But there's a code in art and literature.
Yeah.
Like when Egyptologists went and they saw wide noses on the Sphinx, like they broke them off because it didn't fit the code. Because we are not supposed to be able to do art and science at that level. And so we should shatter the codes. But for those code shatterers out there, be careful.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna.
It's about doing
I
kind
could-
of both.
We could talk for, 2 hours, but we want to make sure that we get to the question and answer because we are running short on time from the audience. But I want to leave this on this thought in my observation, finishing my 22nd year in public education. I see the opposite of what Idris did in terms of code switching, what gets a lot of our young men in trouble. Idris switched from his school, which was the place he was the most comfortable, and changed his code to his community so he wouldn't be teased. I see kids who can't change from their community, and their community behavior, they can't switch to the formal structured behavior, and that's outside the bounds of the cultural expectations of their teachers, and there you go. And that's what I've seen in my experience. And we can go on forever. I wish we could. I'll get your number. We'll talk. So we want to open it up for question and answers. We'll bring the house lights up a little bit, and we'll orchestrate that. And we're very eager to hear some of the thoughts and the questions that some of you may have for our guests.
But let me just tell you a code story while they're coming up.
While they're coming, I want to hear it.
So I have another son. He's 14 now. He's going to high school. And so they were calling him names on his basketball team because he's got a huge vocabulary. They were calling him F-A-G-G-O-T. He's got a mean jump shot and a large vocabulary. And he said, Dad, they don't like the way I speak. They're calling me gay. So I said, what'd you tell him? And he says, I told him I am gay. And I says, that's not the thing to say tell that particular group of people. I appreciate it, but you're going someplace that you don't understand. What they're saying is they don't understand you.
Right.
Help them to understand you. So he learned every rap song of every rapper in the history of the world. And I said, no, that's not the way to go. I says, they don't understand you. Ask them, how's their mom? Do they have a dog? What's their favorite show?
Yeah.
And they began to accept him.
And I think that to your point about going into an environment and they're not, to that, this is where teachers, the institution, understanding the community is key to being able to unpack whatever discomfort that may be felt, or really being the translator, but also having an interaction that's human and humane before judging, and
Building the relationship.
building the relationship.
Absolutely. Do we have a first question anywhere, Mr. Hill? Yes, sir.
People are shy.
First of all, I just want to just let you know how powerful and remarkable that film was. Really appreciate you all producing it. Now, one of the moments that kind of stuck out to me was when Sheun left Dalton School and went to a different school that he seemed to be a little bit more comfortable in, at least in the short excerpt of the film. And I was wondering whether that had any impact on the decision you all had to keep Idris in the Dalton School. And then secondly, if you have enough time to answer the second question, what thoughts do you have about the role of historically black colleges and universities and how that might impact the confidence level of African American males? I say that as a Morehouse College graduate. So.
We always get a Morehouse man. You get that one.
Well, that's a big question. Idris decided not to go to attend Morehouse, to his mother's disappointment, because they offered him a little bit of cash as well. But you know, it's not just about how the school perceives you, as how confident you are in that environment. And so Sheun was uncomfortable in the environment at 5. He was asked a question early on, and he vomited in the 1st grade. And so there was a tall order. He began to experience things in that environment that were real for him, and he needed the social, emotional support to get through that. And he didn't have it. And so, in fact, if he had, it's my belief that he had left that environment much earlier, he would have been a much stronger student and a much stronger human being, because it took a serious toll. Idris had a little different situation. He was more used to being in that kind of diverse environment, white environment, but still it began to take a toll on him. And so, so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's a multifactorial situation. You have to work on the social, emotional growth of your child. And that begins day one. That begins with the kind of books that they're reading, the kind of stories that you tell them, whether or not he has, Idris told this amazing story about, his grandmother to the school, and how she detested Nixon when she came over here from Panama or what was it? Haiti. And so, but the point is that we gave him a narrative that he used, sometimes more effectively than others. And so that's what we have to be about in order to get over that hump. The reality is that when he's 21, he's got to exist in that world. And so ultimately we want him to compete there. But sometimes the way to learn to be competitive is to go into an environment that's more supportive. When my younger son, he's now in the 8th grade, and we are more observant now, whenever he has a lead teacher that says, "Oh, I love him," when we get that kind of message, that he has an amazing year. And so what we're looking for is environments that appreciate him and see him for who he is. And if you can find that, go with it, black, white, Asian, whatever. But the other thing that we are forgetting about, and this is extremely important, the standards are often too low for our sons. So, like, we're talking about arithmetic. We need to talk about AP calculus. And so we can do that. And we've done it in the past, we can do it now. You know, we're working with College Board. 80% of the black men in this country who qualify for AP courses make a decision with their family not to take those courses.
It's not, that's girls too. Yeah, the black girls too.
You're messing with my juju. What were you going to say?
No, I'm just saying it's across the board in terms of, yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Our standards for our kids are not high enough. And if we develop a growth mindset with our children, there is nothing that they can't do.
So my question is, so I know that you said that the girls dropped out and didn't finish, but I'm curious for the 2 girls of color who were part of the project initially, what their experience was like. And then the other thing that struck me in the movie was an experience that I feel like I've had with my children. So, you know, they started out in, you know, Columbus City schools. We moved to the suburbs to give them a different type of experience. And the thing that Idris talked about when he went to the bar mitzvahs and how nobody would dance with him. So, you know, my kids have had that same experience. And so I wondered from a social perspective how he ultimately ended up kind of navigating that.
The girls, we did not remain that close to the 2 girls of color. I mean, they were in Idris's grade, but he didn't hang out with them. So when they kind of like left the project, we didn't stay in touch with them in the same way. They did continue at Dalton till graduation from 12th grade. And, you know, I think Ajay is at Rutgers University, and where is she's at oh my God, it's all girls. Anyway, at Sarah Lawrence, and the other one's at Sarah Lawrence. So I don't really know much how their experiences were. There are other girls of color who Idris was close to at Dalton, they had a difficult time. Social and emotionally, and there was a lot of tension also around the question of college applications, and that, you know, we were kind of aware of in terms of who was getting in where, and a lot of pressure on the students of color, you know, being told that they're going to get in because they're black, and they don't have to worry about SAT scores. So they were trying to combat those microaggressions from their peers regarding how they were perceived in terms of working hard enough or not needing to work as hard as the others, that whole perception that comes from that white privilege perspective. But you had another question which had to do with Idris, yeah. So what's interesting for Idris, I think his high school experience was in some ways the best for him because one, the critical mass increased of students of color at Dalton. In 9th grade, more came in. And we, through our advocacy, were able to work with the administration where his advisor was the only African-American male teacher at that school, Mr. Fisher, who you saw, you know, giving him the report card conversation. And in him, I think, he really, you know, set the path for Idris being able to really feel more ownership of the school because his, you know, he had the bar high, but he was also nurturing, and he also kind of understood Idris, you know, as a student of color. And Idris, through his peers, there's this network in New York City of students of color from independent schools across the city. And they've created this group where they meet once a month and they kind of unpack and talk about the issues. But more importantly, after they have their discussions, they socialize. So they have parties once a month and they meet. I mean, that's how he met his girlfriend. And, you know, we see them whenever he comes home. So he had a strong kind of social network that increased through the high school years of like-minded students.
He met a lot of girls in high school. And also we did our best to help that process also. He had friends that visited, family friends that came from Martinique. We tried to get him to travel and visit family members. He's a very shy guy. But he met his girlfriend at this DAIS convention. They've been together ever since.
All right.
I need not say more about
They
that.
also, I mean, the school also had affinity groups that, interestingly enough, they didn't want us to film. I mean, that was on our list. We really wanted to get into these. There were Men of Colors group, there was a Men of Color group, there was Students of Color, Black Students group that the school had, supported and helped create. But I think they were afraid of having too much access could reveal, a little too many, secrets, I guess.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm Nicholas Graves, student at The Ohio State University. I grew up in the Fort Greene area, so I understand the cultural differences and the diversity. But this is based off my observations. A lot of schools, they really only have one type of, structure for, educating their students. And the language is so esoteric. And it happens to, create these issues, I'm sorry, with students that particular structure does not pertain and does not fit every single student.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it cripples the students, and they like to label students by saying he may have this or she may have this. So my question to you is, what did you do to tell your son that maybe it's not you, it could be the system, or if it is a system, what did you do to help them fight through and strive within the system?
Very good question, and I think it speaks to the complexity of the situation. One thing, have you been to Fort Greene lately?
I was maybe 15 the last time I went.
Okay, it's different.
Okay.
And it's less diverse. Dalton is almost half of color now. They have a huge number of African American teachers. My son went to interview there because it's the school where it is most likely to deal with issues of race and class and privilege in New York City right now. So things change. The reality is that what we want to leave you with is that you can change your environment. And we have to get together and increase transparency. We have to understand that there's a systemic illness that impacts us all, and that by being better than the guy next to us, it doesn't improve our lot. And that there are, I'm sorry to go off from your question because I got a minute and 1 second. And so what we're doing is we're asking everyone here to do something. And parents, if you meet once a month, it will change your child's life. If you start, we start meeting once a month, and let me tell you what happens. Inevitably, some parent's gonna break down crying because, your experience has been my experience. Someone says that we should go talk to this teacher about it, and we have seen so many amazing changes in these schools. And what we need to do is actually be very serious about the discussion of race. And that is something that we're almost afraid to talk about. I'm sure Obama's talking about it with his kids. And we can do it here in Ohio. So is anything you got, we got no more time.
But like I said, I would love to continue this. Please, community, join me in giving them a standing ovation. There you go. So on behalf of Columbus and behalf of our community, I want to sincerely thank you for sharing your film, sharing your knowledge, and sharing your time with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for such a rich discussion. And please join me in thanking our moderator, Scott Reeves, and for our special guest this evening. Just a few quick housekeeping announcements. Good evening. My name is Dawn Tyler Lee, and I have the honor of serving as Senior Vice President of Community Impact at United Way of Central Ohio. We appreciate our filmmakers for sharing your lessons learned and insight on how we can be better advocates and teachers for African American boys as parents, educators, and community members. I encourage all of you here this evening to ponder and implement the things that our guests shared with us. As a reminder and a thank you for participation in tonight's event, you may have received cards that the ushers distributed as you were coming in. If not, they do have some more to share with you. And we wanted to leave you with some action items and takeaway points from this conversation. We hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation, and we'd like to again thank our event sponsors, Donna and Larry James, Crab, Brown and James, Jenny and Louis Smoot, Joy and Bruce Saul, and the Smoot Construction Company of Ohio. In addition, all of the Champion of Children partners and patrons who made this event possible. I would like to also recognize and thank our event partner, The Ohio State University Todd A. Bell National Resource Center, Dr. Valerie Lee, Dr. James Moore, Ty Cornute, and their staff and volunteers. We appreciate your partnership. I would also like to acknowledge our board chair of United Way of Central Ohio, who has joined us this evening, Craig Marshall. We will conclude tonight's event with a coffee and dessert reception in the Lincoln Ballroom, where there are resource tables with information for parents and where our guests will sign copies of their book, Promises Kept, Raising Black Boys to Succeed in School and in Life. Please join us, and if you have not had a chance to acquire the book Loft has copies available for purchase just outside the doors in the first floor lobby. It is comprehensive yet easy to read and really serves as a companion piece to the film and a great follow-up to this evening's discussion. As previously mentioned, this event was hosted in part by two United Way efforts, Key Club, our African American donor group, and Champion of Children, our education initiative. If you would like to get more involved in either or both of these efforts, we invite you to do so. Please fill out an interest card at the registration table in the first floor lobby, or reach out to Charles Hill, Relationship Manager for Key Club, or Elizabeth Trotman, Director of Champion of Children. And let me just say that Charles and Elizabeth have been joined at the hip since last fall when this event was conceived, and I really want to thank them for all of their work pulling this evening together.